The Nuts and Bolts of Writing, Season 2, a podcast where we talk about literature, the ins and outs of writing, and how to actually start writing.
Hey everybody, it's your girl DePunk. I am here with one of the coolest cats. I am with Helevorn, an amazing novelist, historian, and fantastic analyst of all things literary. And today we're going to be discussing the character development as well as analyzing the character themselves. That would be Superman / Clark Kent in 2013's Man of Steel. This version has been met with some controversy from longtime fans, but it's also been welcomed by a lot of newcomers who liked the fresh, original, well, not an original, but sort of a darker, heavier take on it. And joining me in this conversation will be, like I said, the awesome Helevorn. And Helevorn is going to bring her own perspective of it. And I am going to let her now introduce herself and the aims and means of our convo today.
Thank you so much for the introduction and the welcoming. So our conversation is going to bring two different perspectives. So while you, Tete, are well versed in the Superman mythos and you have a more intimate connection to the character as a longtime fan, as someone who grew up with Superman, my knowledge of the lore is rather basic, but my impression of the movie stems from my analysis of it as a standalone production. So I'm more going to analyze the character as the protagonist of the movie, and just a bit of a comparison with I guess his image in previous Superman movies, since I'm not knowledgeable of the comics.
That sounds like an awesome segue into this. And I think this is going to be a really, really cool conversation.
I hope so. And I hope it will bring something different to the conversation, because like you said, this movie has been met with quite a bit of controversy, and the audience was quite divided. Well, I guess my opinion is quite unpopular in that I loved the movie and I have a lot of good things to say about it. It's definitely not perfect, but I really loved it in terms of the composition, the narration itself, the cinematography, the imagery. But I know that you have also quite an out of the ordinary opinion as a longtime fan. And because you have a very good grasp of Superman's character in various incarnations, and you also have your favorite, and you can talk about the inspiration for this character and his more original incarnation. So right, let's dive into it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think the first thing we're going to tackle is just to recap for the movie itself. So, I mean, I'll bring my perspective, but I think for you, from our previous conversation that we had, you really enjoyed the heavier gravity that was, you know, interwoven in the character. And what were some of the key moments, or what did you particularly like about this heavier interpretation, especially, you know, with him being I guess you could say promoted to almost like a godlike status? What were the aspects that you particularly enjoyed, or that you saw clearly made it stand out from the other iterations?
Right. So, as you said in the introduction, since I'm into historical fiction and I really love those epics with honorable heroes or less honorable as great characters with a lot of psychology. So I love this this combination between this epic scenes and depth of character. So at the same time, I'm really not into superhero movies. In fact, I think that before 2013, when this movie came out, I was rather under the impression that superhero movies are for children. I'm not very much into fantasy either, but I love The Lord of the Rings also for the gravity, for its similarity to mythology rather than to just some fantasy action light-hearted thing. So I think that this is what I saw in Man of Steel. I found it different and it sort of overturned my expectations of what a superhero movie was supposed to be because of this gravity, because of the artistic cinematography, because honestly, I was expecting to see, a lot of superhero movies like the Marvel ones and also the old Superman ones where everything is like hearted. The battle scenes are interrupted with some kind of comic relief so that it's not intense enough. The character never has doubts because he is always good and he always knows what the right thing to do is and he always does it without hesitation. And I never found that convincing because beyond what Superman is supposed to represent in the consciousness of people, especially American people, I wanted something to really convince me to see him as a human. I guess I can say that even though he's Kryptonian, but as a human being, I wanted to be able to relate to him, and I found this in Man of Steel.
I agree with you. Man of Steel was in many aspects a very beautiful, ambitious work. And there were many aspects that I enjoyed of it. My main opinion, which like yours is not popular, is because for me, I always view Superman / Clark. I always view him as Clark before I view him as Superman, mainly because I had grown up since 1997. I was starting to learn how to read. I read comics from my local library, and the first comics I read were the old Golden Age ones, the originals by Siegel and Schuster, his creators. And it's such a different flavor tone. It's a different animal, so to speak, and he is such a different person in that. So I know that most of the incarnations of Superman after the 1950s follows this template, and then after the late 80s we get this major shift into more of a powerful godlike person. But then, like you said, unfortunately a lot of comics are marred, or I guess we could say interspersed, or they have these intervals of comic relief. So we are robbed of a lot of gravitas, although there are a number of comics that have really brought a heavy gravitas, sometimes too heavy. But returning back to the critique, if you will, of Man of Steel, there were many brilliant aspects of it. And like you, I really saw just the really good, solid mythological aspects brought to it. And there's always this mythological comparison of Superman and his feats, so to speak. When I started to study, when I began to read more mythology, I began to see parallels of the things that he was doing, like with the great epics, like the Epic of Gilgamesh and things like that, as well as other like say figures from religious mythos, if you will, or religious context, like like Shamsun, Samson. But I also saw too, I mean, I didn't know if anybody got this parallel, but I sensed it in a way, particularly in Man of Steel, the conflict between Superman and General Zod, it felt very similar to like the Mesopotamian epic where there is a conflict with the old gods, particular Tiamat, who I probably am butchering all these, Mesopotamian names. And then we have a younger god who is sort of the champion for the beginning of the earth, Marduk. And I felt like, there's this conflict of Tiamat, the older gods against, the younger champion Marduk. It felt very similar to what I was seeing, played out in Man of Steel. It was just more like, modern alien tech, cities, that sort of thing. But I did like the mythical grandiose that was brought into Man of Steel. And there were a lot of other aspects too. I think what jarred a lot of fans was that they were so used to Superman being pretty lighthearted. I mean, there have been other takes of heavier stuff, but unfortunately DC doesn't know what to do with the Superman property. They really do not. But that is a long convoluted, I want to say long convoluted, but I don't want to go into the history because I'm going to go into, saying this is why DC did some very questionable things. And, this is why they don't know what to do with Superman, because they chucked out his original creators, but
Yeah,
that was
that's
my,
true.
that was my takeaway from Man of Steel. I guess my other critiques were things like pacing. I felt like some characters weren't given a chance to develop properly, particularly General Zod. So there are two characters in the Superman mythos that I particularly enjoy, I should say, or appreciate, and that would be Lex Luthor and General Zod, because I feel there's a lot of great potential for these two, but it's never executed properly. I feel like Man of Steel just reached the tip top. They almost had General Zod, but then I feel like in the end they kind of reduced him to, this evil totalitarian who just wants to, destroy and dominate humans rather than make him more fleshed out. And that said, I've always wanted to see more explored with Zod. Like I remember there was one AU where instead of Superman being the champion of the earth, if you will, Zod had to do it, but he did it in a different, more psychological, questionable way, and it was an interesting take on Zod, and Zod was surprisingly sympathetic. I particularly like that take on Zod. And then I guess my only other critique was, I guess it's because it's an origin story, so this is a thing of Clark trying to find his footing in the world and who he is. But sometimes I feel like it faltered for me. But then again, it just might be my bias. Like I said, I've been a Superman fan since 1997, 26 years going strong. And, my favorite iterations are not that of the general fan. In fact, I talked to some fans there, a lot of them don't even know what Golden Age is, or they've not really read any of the original stuff by Siegel and Schuster. So, and that in itself brings just almost an entirely different character. But maybe that's all right. Maybe Superman is meant to be sort of a symbolic role of which many people can interpret him for the time being, or whatever structure of story they're going to follow, so to speak.
That's very true, and those were some truly fascinating points that you made. First of all, with the mythology, the mythological aspect in both Superman's character and in his interactions with General Zod, and I completely agree with that. This is why I mentioned that I generally don't like the action fantasy genre, but then Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite movies ever. And this is why, because like you said about Man of Steel as well, they did get right the grandeur and the epicness of mythology. So I love that. I love the dark and the gritty and the hard-hitting psychology. So I love that we got to see Superman's character on a deeper level. But at the same time, it never occurred to me, the thing that you said about General Zod, because I did not really give a lot of thought to him. So I think that's fascinating. So I'd like to ask you, how do you see General Zod's motivation? because in the movie we saw that indeed, like you said, there wasn't an attempt to make him not really relatable, but a sort of a foil to Superman, because he was doing whatever was best for his people. In the movie, we were told that every person on Krypton is supposed to fulfill a certain role from birth. And General Zod's role was to protect Kryptonians, and this is what he was doing. So in a sense, he was very loyal and very perseverant, and nothing could stand in his way. So I guess that was the line through which they were trying to make him his motivation sort of understandable. But then, yes, he did sort of degenerate into a tyrant. So how do you see him, and what else would you bring to him in terms of his motivation? How would you make his motivation feel more understandable?
More understandable. Very wonderful question. I really appreciate this. I think for General Zod, I think it would have been better maybe to see more of Krypton itself. Originally, and this is where a lot of people falter and maybe not understand, Krypton originally, when it was conceived by Siegel and Schuster, it's meant to be an allegory of the old world. And this is an allegory of the old world for many immigrants during that time, early 20th century to mid 20th century. There's a lot of political upheaval. A lot of things in many ways are sort of imploding or exploding like Krypton. So Krypton is an allegory for, political and social chaos of the old world, where a lot of people were, forced or felt compelled for their own safety to leave their original countries and come to America. So Krypton is an allegory, for the old world, as they say. And I think a lot of times too, it's hard to bring that perspective to make it relevant to today. Although that said, with the turmoil of the world, maybe that will once again be relevant. I wish it was not the case, but society does have its patterns. It's just the thing of humanity. But I think it would have been nice to have seen more of Krypton, to actually know more Kryptonians besides Kal-El's parents, Jor-El and Lara. I think it would have been, and to see more beyond just like the, dystopian, authoritarian, dictators, so to speak. I think it would have been nicer to have seen more of the civilians, more of the connections, more of the people. That way we get a better sense for Zod's motivation as well, because we see that, like, just everywhere, everyone is pretty much the same, whether it's a linguistic or a cultural barrier, we all have the same desires, wants, and needs. We are all, woven into this fabric of humanity. And even though Krypton's supposed to be quote unquote alien, it's not really. It's just, human beings that are just have more tech. That's it. There's nothing else. And I would have loved to have seen more Kryptonians. I would have loved to have seen maybe more, maybe General Zod had a relationship with friends or family, and this would have given us more. This is why he's motivated. He doesn't want to see his people, die or disappear. And, there is unfortunately this hard ruthlessness of survival ingrained in him. And I would have loved to have seen more of that. Instead, I feel like in the end, he, like you said, he degenerates into a tyrant. But then what really kills his character for us to have any sympathy for him is the fact that he has this huge disdain of of humanity, of Earth, and its people and things like that. I think that's what killed his sympathy. I mean, they make him into this person who's okay. Oh, genocide. Okay, I'll just go do this. And he's often very degrading Earth's humanity. And it doesn't help the fact that we almost don't really feel too sympathetic towards the humans, because we see this disconnect with Clark and the humans. The only positive people we're seeing so far is, would be his foster parents, Jonathan and Martha and Lois. and that's about it. So it gives us such an imbalance. Like, morally obligated, we have to root for the humans. But then on the other hand, we don't feel much for Zod's motivation, because we don't see what he's fighting for. We understand what he's fighting for. He's very vocal about it. But I think if we would have seen more of connection with humanity with Clark, and I think more more of Zod's connections, with his Kryptonian people, this would have made the conflict all the more poignant and heartbreaking. Because on one hand, if we saw this, we want Zod to win. I mean, we don't want him to destroy humans or Earth, but we want him to be able to accomplish that goal for he and his people, because they're just the same like us. Why don't we, have peace and figure something out? But then on the other hand, we understand why Clark has to be the champion of the Earth, why he has to, if you will, take on the mantle of Marduk,
That's very true. That's really a fascinating perspective, and it makes a lot of sense. Indeed, we only see Zod as a military leader, but we don't see him as a person, not at all throughout the entire movie. And that indeed would have helped to make him a more compelling villain. So, yeah, that's true. You're very correct. Another thing that I wanted to ask you is, what did you think about Superman's hesitation? Because you got a bit into this about his lack of connection with humanity. So what did you think about that part of the movie? Because I know that a lot of people wanted him to be this very
virtue.
yeah, really good person, the kind of the Boy Scout Superman, that we see in the older movies. And I
The
know
big blue
that,
Boy Scout.
yeah, you and I really dislike that, but for different reasons. So that would be interesting to get into. So, what do you think? How do you see this? His goodness and his
here's the question. Okay, this is a wonderful question. I love it. This is going to ruffle the feather of a lot of fanboys. But here's my take. So, original Superman, originally by Siegel and Schuster, he is a bit of a roughneck when it comes to things, and he's not afraid to use force or kill bad guys. I mean, he even has a more wild moral code than Bruce could ever. Your fave could never, as I say. But then you have to remember, the original Superman was dealing with a lot of vicious criminals, mobsters, not to mention, people who were stand-ins, for very disturbing fascists who were doing things on a big scale that would, end in a lot of people getting hurt or killed. So for Clark, originally, he's very much a bit of a ruthless city man. So, if somebody accidentally falls out of a plane, he's like, well, oh, there you go, bye. Or if there's a lot of times where he'll actually threaten the guys, and he'll be like, I'm not going to hesitate to kill you if you rat out on this, because there's a lot of things at stake. So Clark will not shy away from killing. It's like I say, the Man of Tomorrow wasn't shy about ending the tomorrows for some of the people he had to encounter. So I never liked this goody two-shoe Boy Scout, this guy rescuing a cat from the tree and all that. I feel like in many ways, and I don't want to upset the people who like Batman, but in many ways, Superman can be darker than Batman, because at least Batman, I guess, has a very strict moral code. Meanwhile, Superman is just all over the board, and he does not, it's like he wants to avoid that, but if it happens, he's not going to shed much tears over it. So, but then again, you have to think of the original context. He really got sanitized, over Silver Age, Bronze Age, DC 52, Rebirth, all these different stages with DC. But I don't like this goody two-shoe, because I like I like it when there's a bit of a ruthlessness to Clark, because the world itself is very harsh and cruel, and sometimes the only way to do it is to be relentless or ruthless. And I'm glad that Clark can acknowledge that, because he's going to use, if you will, this thing of darkness for a positive thing. So I and myself, I want to say that if let's say if Golden Age Clark was in this situation, which, number one, he wouldn't have all these godlike powers. He was obviously underpowered and more human, and you saw more of Clark than you saw more of Superman in Golden Age. But let's just say we apply his morality to this movie. I want to say that I think General Zod would have been taken out a lot sooner. Like, I mean, he wouldn't even let him like do all that building smashing. He would have been like, snap your neck, sorry, buddy. You know, better you than all the people of flipping Metropolis. And then snap. Okay, we're done. Hey, Lois, I'm done. You know, want to go out to eat?
I love that.
Yeah. You know, man don't give a crap. He goes and does it. You know, he's not going to have a moral melt. I did like that moral vulnerability. I mean, I'm a sucker for male angst and vulnerability. About 80% of what I write is men having vulnerability.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I completely understand that, and I really love what you said, how you describe Superman. And this is exactly what I think about him as well, in that I love that Superman is more emotional than Batman, like you said, and being emotional doesn't mean being more good. It also means being more prone to anger. And this is exactly what I always saw in Superman, and Batman's moral code, right? This is what makes him more steadfast in a sense. And that's the reason why he keeps the kryptonite, right? In case Superman does something really bad and needs to be stopped, and Batman is the one that can stop him, right? So
he's the one, yeah, he's got that under the car seat. He's like, just in case, you know, Clark, you know, flips his lid.
Exactly. So I really love this, and I think that this makes him more relatable, much more so than those incarnations of him,
rescuing cats from trees.
Exactly. I mean, let's be serious. He has this godly powers. Why would he bother with things like that? Of course, he has to see the bigger picture. Of course, he sees it naturally because he is different from humans. And even in those in the Golden Age ones where he isn't as godlike, there are still very grave things at stake that are much greater than one person. So of course we have to see him getting into those things, and seeing him in actions that truly raise the stakes, and not see him as yes, we
a
want
paragon
to see
of
him as
virtue.
yeah. So yeah, we want to see him as Clark Kent, but not the kind of Clark Kent who is, clumsy and pretends to not see well without his glasses, and trips over his own shoes, and
I know
risks,
that. I
and
hate
helps
that.
elderly ladies cross the street. You know,
I
who
hate
wants to see
that.
that?
And also, you know, I don't know, just I mean, I never liked this incarnation because I mean, even in Golden Age, even though sometimes he does, you know, pretend to back away from violence, this is actually pretty realistic for the average man living in the city in American Depression. I mean, there's a lot of shooting, a lot of violence in these, you know, rough and rumble cities. The Depression is just, you know, caked, inundated with violence. And believe it or not, sometimes this was a little influence too, because Siegel's dad was killed in a store robbery. So I sort of feel like that will ever be forever influencing, you know, Siegel, and why he wanted to see, you know, a sort of defense against, you know, crime against civilians. And yeah, so this isn't a Clark who, you know, helps ladies walk across the street, or he's not a shy and bumbling person. He's very much a well-disciplined, well-organized man who knows what he's doing. And he's in a, you know, head-to-head competition with Lois in their journalistic career as well. I love to see more of that. I don't see that in a lot of these carnations. It's usually just him, you know, donning on the, you know, blue spandex and hitting the bricks.
Indeed, and the fact that he's prone to anger, I think that it's a powerful part of his personality to see him holding back. Because, of course, on the one hand, he can do so much damage if he wanted to, but he is very aware of that. So, of course, he tries not to do violence, but this is a very conscious effort for him. It's not that he is very good because he just is, because he knows what the right thing is and he just wants to do it. No, there's a battle going on inside of him. And I think that this is what a lot of Superman incarnations don't show. And I think that Man of Steel got this, managed to show this, because we see a lot of him holding back, and then with Zod, because they are on par, and he truly uses all of his powers with him and defeats him, whereas of course with humans he always holds back. So I think that this is what the movie got right. But at the same time, what I want to ask you about this, what did you think Man of Steel didn't get right in terms of Superman's attitude towards humanity?
I think the main thing it got wrong, I think we should have seen more connection. I think maybe more of his friendship, from his, childhood. I know he was alienated, so this really leads to this kind of godlike alienation, which I think was the vision Snyder was going for. But I would have loved to have seen more connection. Now a lot of people like the Smallville canon. I sort of agree with that. I think that's a good thing to start with. I'm not really into the Smallville canon because I'm more of Clark the city man than Clark the farm boy, because I tend to follow a different canon, which I'll get into another time. But maybe I could have seen more of him, maybe bonding with people at the Daily Planet. It's hard to tell. I mean, I think I would have liked to have seen maybe more friendships outside of that. What are his hobbies? What does he do? We see some of this in Golden Age. We see some of his friendships and the camaraderie that he has with, whether that's his fellow journalists or just other people in Metropolis, because he has friends and he looks out for them too, because the depression is screwing everybody over. So Golden Age is pretty much a product of its time, which is a beautiful thing. And unfortunately now it's relevant with economic depression and political tension. But for Man of Steel, I would have liked to have seen more connection. I would have liked to have seen more warmth. I would have liked to have seen a bit of humor, because not the silly Marvel kind of humor where everybody's quipping something and a building explodes, but
Yes.
more of, because Clark is he's kind of a teasing man. He's a bit of a, bleep around and find out type of man. And he will mess with people a bit. It'll either be out of fondness because he appreciates them, or it'll just be to be mean, because sometimes Clark can be just mean, but I love it because he's being mean to the right people. And I enjoy it so much.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Those are excellent points indeed. I think that so while the movie, I think, got his relation to General Zod and to stopping evil, or stopping the enemies of humanity, if you will, what it didn't really show is his connection to humans, because we see him rather aloof and alienated, sorry,
Yeah,
during
alienated.
most of the movie. I mean, I think that, like you said, this is what Snyder was going for, because part of the arc in the movie, of Superman's arc, was to get him to actually stand for humanity, because in the beginning he is sort of thrown into it and he knows it is his duty. He grows up with a tremendous pressure on his shoulders, knowing that he has to defend humanity because he's so strong and they are so weak and they need protection. And then Zod comes out from out of nowhere and wants to destroy it. And it's sort of Superman's fault, because he was the one who used the spaceship and gave him the signal. So he sort of feels this adds to his pressure. So, but then by the end, and I think that this is what Snyder was trying to show, that by the end he actually starts to he makes the conscious decision to defend humanity. And this is why we see him in the end of the movie saying that he's going to help humanity from now on if they allow him to. So they sort of, so I guess that the movie was truly the beginning of his connection to humanity. I'm not sure how canon this is, because as I understand it, up to this point he had already established a connection, you know, growing up and everything. But in the movie, this is how it was presented. I think it works for the movie, for the story, for the narrative, and for the character from the movie. But yes, for Superman as a whole, there were certain things that could have been done much better and much more accurately.
I agree. I think it works very good that way. I think it works good for the creation that it is. I think it established a very good segue into the character. And I think generally speaking, I think Snyder did a decent job. You know, I can't fault him. And there were a lot of beautiful aspects to the movie. One that I'm just going to throw out there, that beautiful, beautiful score by Hans Zimmer. That flight scene was just transcendental. I mean, that was a it was just beautiful. So I guess for me, I bring in bias because I'm a lifelong Superman fan. But you know what? I think if we just think about it as its iteration of itself, Man of Steel was pretty solid. It was pretty solid in many aspects. I think just maybe more motivation, you know, more pain of the conflict for both of them, you know, more with Zod and the Kryptonians, and then more of Clark with humanity. Then that way, you know, we're both crying for them in the end. Like, oh, I don't want Zod to die. I'm like, oh no, but he has to. And then it's like, you know, it's like it's bittersweet. It's a hollow victory. I feel like we should have had a bit more of that, you know.
Yeah, that is very true. And yes, you said it right. I think that this is if you see this as a standalone, as I sort of unwillingly saw it because I'm not knowledgeable of the rest of it. I also think it works really well for what it is, and I also think that the Superman mythos is truly huge. There are so many different incarnations of him, and his character, having been around for so long, has changed a lot over time, has passed through several stages. And I think that it is, and please contradict me if I'm right, I think it is impossible to make a movie, a 2-hour long movie, where you please all the fans and where you just have a story and a character that is consistent with everything in his mythos.
You cannot. I mean, not even a lot of long comic series could not accomplish this. And you're not going to please every fan. I mean, there's going to be fans that prefer the lighthearted goofiness of Silver Age. Some people like the gritty, more visceral tones of Bronze and, you know, the late 90s and 80s, early 2000s. Some people like the whatever direction that New 52 or Rebirth is doing. I do not know what's going on with DC. It's a hot dumpster fire mess, but some people like that direction. And then you have, you know, little weirdos like me that still think it's 1938, y'all.
It's really wonderful to have your perspective, because I had never heard about or about the lore from the Golden Age, and this is absolutely fascinating to listen to you talk about it. And I've learned so many things, and I've become a better Superman fan after watching Man of Steel and after hearing your perspective on it and on the character. So thank you so
Yay.
much.
You're very welcome. This was an awesome convo. I hope we have more convos, and thank you for having me on here.
And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, goodbye. See you next time.
Bye. See you next time.